Shabba's confession and a new encounter, love, laughter, and big decisions. Shabba sat nervously in the village, staring at the flames of the fire. Tonight was the night. He had to tell his European woman the truth. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. Taking a deep breath, he waited for her to arrive. When she finally walked up to him, smiling, he knew this wouldn't be easy. The truth unfolds, a heartbreaking confession. Shabba looked at her seriously. My woman, I must tell you something. She tilted her head, curious but unaware of the storm about to hit her. What is it, Shabba? He hesitated, then spoke quickly before he lost his courage. My ex, she is pregnant again for me. Silence. The European woman just stared at him. Her smile disappeared, her eyes widened, and she took a step back. What? She whispered. Shabba scratched his head, nervous. It was before. Long time ago. Before you. The woman's face turned red. She crossed her arms. Shabba. I can't believe this. Another child? Shabba nodded slowly. Yes. Tears welled in her eyes. She turned away, shaking her head. I need to think. Before Shabba could say anything else, she walked away into the darkness, leaving him alone. Lost and confused, a wild decision. Shabba sat by the fire for hours, waiting. Maybe she would come back. Maybe she would forgive him. But the night passed and she never returned. The next morning, Shabba made a decision. Lightbulb, he would leave the village for a while. Lightbulb, he needed to clear his mind. Lightbulb, he would go where the tourists gathered, where the American visitors came to see the great African wildlife. Maybe, just maybe, he would find her there. The journey to the tourist camp. Shabba grabbed his bow and arrows, slung them over his shoulder, and walked for miles through the Hadzabe bushland. The sun was hot, the animals were plenty, elephants, lions, and antelopes roamed freely. When he finally reached the tourist camp, he searched everywhere for her, but she was gone. She had left. Shabba sighed, feeling lost. Had he ruined everything? A new American woman, a chance encounter. As he stood there, unsure of what to do next, he noticed someone watching him. A young American woman, standing alone, looking at him with curiosity. She smiled and walked closer. Hello, she said brightly. Shabba blinked. He didn't understand all of her words, but her energy was warm and friendly. She spoke again. Are you Hadzabe? Shabba grinned. That word he knew. Yes. Hadzabe warrior, he said proudly, beating his chest. She laughed. Wow. That's amazing. Shabba, feeling bold, started making jokes in his broken English, adding dramatic dance moves. He jumped high like a Maasai warrior, then acted like he was hunting an imaginary lion. The American woman couldn't stop laughing. She held her stomach, tears in her eyes from giggling so much. Something unexpected was happening, a connection was forming. Does language matter? Even though Shabba couldn't speak fluent English, and the American woman didn't understand his Hadzabe language, they still connected through laughter, gestures, and energy. She wanted to know more about his life. She asked about his hunting, his traditions, and his people. Shabba tried his best to explain, sometimes with words, sometimes with actions. The more they talked, the more she became interested in his world. For the first time in days, Shabba wasn't sad anymore. A big decision, face responsibility or escape? As the sun began to set, Shabba's mind was filled with questions. Should he go back and take responsibility for his ex and the baby? Or should he disappear into the wilderness, start fresh, and leave his problems behind? Was this American woman a sign of a new beginning? Shabba looked up at the sky, thinking deeply. The stars had always guided him before, maybe they would guide him now. One thing was certain, his adventure was far from over. Shabba's crossroads, a man torn between two worlds. The sun had set over the vast Hadzabe land, and the night was alive with the sounds of nature. Shabba sat by the fire, deep in thought. His heart was heavy. His European woman had left him. His ex was carrying his child. And now, a new American woman was showing interest in him. What was he supposed to do? The call of responsibility versus the temptation of escape. Shabba's friends gathered around him, sensing his troubles. They knew he had two choices. Return to his village and take responsibility for the unborn child. Stay in the tourist camp, enjoy his freedom, and see what happens with the American woman. One of his closest friends, Bado, leaned forward and said, "Shabba, a real warrior does not run from his past." Another friend laughed. "But he also does not ignore a new woman when she shows interest." The men erupted in laughter, but Shabba did not laugh. His mind was spinning. What should he do? A surprising encounter with the American woman. The next morning, as the sun rose, Shabba found himself walking back toward the tourist camp. He wasn't sure why. Was he looking for the American woman, or was he just trying to escape his problems? As he reached the camp, he saw her sitting on a rock, watching the elephants in the distance. She turned and smiled. "Hey, Shabba." He grinned. "Hey, America." She laughed at the nickname. "You remember me?" Shabba sat next to her. Even though they couldn't speak the same language well, their connection was real. She handed him a piece of bread from her bag. Shabba took it, but in return, he gave her something special, dried honeycomb from his village. She tasted it and gasped. "This is amazing." Shabba smiled. "Hadzabe honey. Very strong. Like me." She laughed again. For a moment, Shabba forgot all his troubles. Reality strikes, a message from the village. Just as Shabba was starting to enjoy himself, a young Hadzabe boy ran into the camp. Breathless, he called out, "Shabba! You must come back." Shabba's heart pounded. "Why?" The boy hesitated. Then, in a serious voice, he said, "The baby is coming. Your ex needs you." Silence. The American woman looked at Shabba, sensing something important was happening. "What's wrong?" she asked. Shabba stood up, looking toward the village, then back at her. Should he stay and explore this new connection with the American woman? Or should he go back to face his responsibilities? This was it. The moment of truth. Shabba's new love, the American dream, or the African bush? The sun hung low over the Hadzabe land, casting golden rays across the vast wilderness. Shabba stood frozen, staring at the young boy who had delivered the news. Thought Balloon his ex was about to give birth. Thought Balloon his village was calling him back. Thought Balloon, but here, right in front of him, was something new, something exciting. The American woman watched him closely, sensing his hesitation. She reached out, gently placing a hand on his arm. "Shabba, what's wrong?" Shabba exhaled deeply. How could he explain? He had just met her, yet she already felt different, like she truly saw him, like she understood him in a way no one else had before. Should he run back to his old life, or was this a sign to start fresh? A confession under the African sky. Shabba sat down on a large rock, rubbing his face. He had to tell her everything. Looking into her bright, curious eyes, he started speaking, slowly, choosing his words carefully. I have woman in village. She carry my baby." She blinked but didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head. "Your wife?" Shabba shook his head. "No wife. Before. Now, problem." She listened closely, not interrupting. Shabba continued, his voice softer now. "European woman, she leave me. Now baby come. Village want me back." For a long moment, she was silent. Shabba braced himself. Was this the moment she walked away? But instead, she smiled. "Shabba. I don't care about that. I want to know you." Shabba's eyes widened. "You know care?" She laughed. No. Life is complicated. But I want to be with you, not your past. His heart pounded. This was new. This was different. In the village, people expected him to follow tradition. But this woman saw him as he was, not just as a Hadzabe warrior, not just as a hunter, but as a man. A future in America? She took a deep breath, looking into the distance, then turned back to him. I want to take you to America, she said suddenly. Shabba froze. Thought balloon America? Thought balloon leaving his land, his people, his way of life. It sounded impossible. Too big, too different. Shabba shook his head. No, I cannot. My home is here. She reached for his hand. Shabba, imagine it. You could see my world, experience new things. And I promise, I would never ask you to change. Shabba looked at their hands. It was strong, this feeling between them. But America? That was a world he could barely imagine. Shabba's crossroads, love, tradition, and the call of the unknown. The night was quiet, but inside Shabba's mind, there was a storm. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames, his heart caught between two worlds. Thought balloon his village, his traditions, his people, where he belonged. Thought balloon a new love, a new adventure, a chance to see a world beyond his wildest imagination. The American woman had given him a choice, stay and be the man his village expected him to be, or leave and explore a future he never thought possible. Could he really leave? Morning comes with a decision. The first rays of the sun stretched over the horizon. Shabba had barely slept. He knew he had to talk to the American woman. She needed to know how deep his struggle was. As he walked toward the camp, he found her sitting by the river, dipping her fingers into the cool water. She turned when she heard his footsteps and smiled. Shabba, she said softly, patting the space next to her. Come sit. Shabba hesitated, then lowered himself onto the warm earth beside her. He looked at her, then at the water, before finally speaking. I don't know what to do. She nodded, waiting for him to continue. My home, my baby, my people. They need me. His voice was heavy, full of uncertainty. But you make me feel something new. She reached for his hand. You don't have to choose today, Shabba. Shabba shook his head. I must. A man must know where he belongs. She took a deep breath. And where do you belong? Shabba sighed. That was the question. The village calls. Before Shabba could answer, a group of Hadzabe men approached. One of them, Bado, looked serious. Shabba, you must come now. Shabba stood quickly. What happened? The baby has come. His heart jumped. His child had been born. The American woman touched his arm. Go, Shabba. Be with your family. Shabba hesitated. He didn't want to leave her. But this was his blood. He nodded and ran. The new father. When Shabba reached the village, people were gathered around his ex's hut. The air was filled with excitement and celebration. An elder woman smiled at him. Shabba, you are a father now. His ex sat inside, holding a tiny baby wrapped in soft animal skins. She looked up at him with tired eyes. Your son, Shabba. Shabba stepped closer, staring at the little face. A son. His blood. His future. He touched the baby's tiny fingers, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. He was home. But his heart was torn. That night, as the village celebrated, Shabba sat alone, staring at the stars. His child was here, and his people needed him. But his heart was still with the American woman. Could he really ignore what he felt? Could he walk away from something that felt so new, so powerful? Or was his duty to his son more important? As the fire crackled beside him, Shabba knew one thing. He had a choice to make, and whatever he chose would change his life forever. Stay and be the father his. Shabba's dilemma, a heart divided between duty and love. The village was alive with celebration. Women sang and clapped their hands, men danced around the fire, and elders smoked their pipes, nodding with approval. A new life had entered the world, and that was always a reason for joy. But inside Shabba's heart, there was only confusion. His son was here. His ex had given birth. His village expected him to stay and be a father. But his heart was still with the American woman. He couldn't shake the feeling that a part of his future was outside of this village. A late-night visit. As the fire burned low, Shabba sat alone, deep in thought. That's when Bado, his childhood friend, approached him. Shabba, you do not dance. You do not sing. What is wrong? Shabba sighed. I have my son now. My people need me. Bado nodded. Yes, they do. But that is not what troubles you. Shabba looked up at the sky. How could he explain what was in his heart? Finally, he spoke. I met a woman. She wants to take me to America. Bado's eyes widened. America? Shabba, that is far. Shabba nodded. I know. But I feel something new. She understands me. She does not care about my past. Bado was silent for a moment. Then, he smiled. You are a strong hunter, my friend. But even the strongest hunter must choose his path. Do you follow the track that is familiar, or do you chase the unknown? Shabba ran a hand through his hair. That was the question, wasn't it? A secret meeting. The next morning, before the village woke, Shabba made a decision. He had to see her one more time. He slipped away from the village, moving swiftly through the bushland. He knew where she would be, by the river, where they had sat the day before. And there she was. She turned when she heard his footsteps, her face lighting up. Shabba. He took a deep breath. This was it. I have a son now. She smiled softly. I know. Congratulations. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in his heart. Would you still take me to America? She looked at him, surprised. You would come? Shabba sighed. I do not know. My son, he is here. My people are here. She nodded. I understand, Shabba. I would never ask you to leave them forever. But what if you came for a little while? Just to see my world? Shabba looked at the water, his thoughts racing. Could he do that? Could he leave, even for a short time? Was his duty stronger than his heart? The crossroads. Shabba knew he had a choice. Stay and be the father his people expected him to be? Or take a chance, explore the world, and return as a man who had seen both sides? One choice was safe. The other was a risk. He had never been afraid of a hunt. But this? This was the biggest hunt of all. What would Shabba choose? To be continued. Shabba's new love, the American woman after the European woman left. The sun rose over the vast Hadzabe bushland, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold. The village was waking up, but Shabba was already deep in thought. Thought balloon the European woman had left. She had walked away, unable to understand his world, unable to accept his past. Thought balloon, but now, there was the American woman. A woman who laughed at his jokes, who didn't mind his traditions, and who seemed to see something special in him. Was this a second chance at love? A new connection. Shabba and the American woman spent more time together. She was different. She didn't ask him to change, didn't try to pull him away from his people. She just wanted to know him. They would sit by the river, where she asked him about hunting, about his childhood, about the ways of the Hadzabe. And when Shabba spoke, she listened, truly listened, her eyes filled with curiosity and admiration. One day, she said, Shabba, your world is beautiful. He grinned. And your world? She hesitated, then smiled. It is very different. But I think you would love it. Shabba laughed. Maybe. But deep inside, a thought was growing. Was there a place for him in her world? A dream of something bigger. One night, as the stars lit up the sky, the American woman made a bold offer. Shabba, come with me. Just for a visit. See America. See something new. Shabba's heart pounded. Could he do it? He had spent his whole life in the wild, under the open sky. Could he leave, even for a little while? His people would think he was crazy. But his heart was telling him something else. Maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to dream beyond the land he had always known. To be continued.